It's ghetto, I wanna leave, can you beam me up? I'm out on the street by the corner store, you know, the one on 15th, got a bright shirt on, so
Welcome yet again to another episode of Bobo's Void. I am very excited for this episode because we're talking about one of my favorite topics, as you already know, which is dying. But more importantly, we're talking about the idea and the human right to die with dignity. And I have a really incredible guest who's doing incredible things in that realm, Abbey. Hi, Abbey.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I think before we dive in, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and how you got into that? I think you have a really interesting story.
Sure. So at the moment, I'm working alongside a charity called Dying with Dignity, and I'm based in New South Wales, Australia. And they're a charity who are trying to help legalize voluntary assisted dying here. So I think they're where you are, because you're in America, right?
Yeah.
So where you are, it's most commonly referred to as euthanasia. And
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and then here we've kind of coined the term voluntary assisted dying, and that's because we just want to make sure that everyone sort of across, knows that it is a voluntary thing, because there's lots of kind of backlash in the realm of using the words euthanasia as we could just sort of implement this rule, we would just be killing everybody.
Yeah.
So making sure that it is a voluntary act. I guess how I got into this and why it's such important work to me specifically is I lost my partner in 2018 from a really horrific battle with cervical cancer.
Oh no.
So Jade was only 32 when she died, and had a really hard time, and just, watching her struggle towards the end and seeing how hard it was for not only her, but obviously myself and her family to watch her go through that. Just thought there has to be a better way, and there definitely is.
Yeah.
So here we are, nearly 3 years on, and still trying to get it across the line here.
Oh, wow.
Hopefully this is the year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I mean, how is that process going? I imagine, because there's so much stigma around dying, and because we live in a culture that perceives dying to be something that is inherently negative and living as something inherently positive, I imagine there must be so much pushback. And
there is, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how progressive or not progressive New South Wales or even Australia is.
Yeah.
So how has that process been, and how have people been receiving this?
Well, it's interesting you say that there's a lot of pushback, because I'll talk about New South Wales specifically for a second. In New South Wales, the stats are that 85% of the community are for this. So,
interesting.
And that's a huge number. 85% is a huge number. It's when you get to the kind of political level is when you start to get the pushback.
Yeah.
Because politicians just don't want to go anywhere near this, because death is such a taboo subject, and people just want to shy away from it, kind of sweep it under the carpet. But Australia is actually obviously divided up by the states, some New South Wales, Victoria and Western Australia, etc.
Yeah.
And so 2 of our states actually have this passed already.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, okay. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you're right. No, I was just about to say, so it's interesting with the pushback talk, is that in terms of the community, 85% is people who want it. So yeah.
My suspicion, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. My suspicion is that the reason there's pushback on a political level is because of capitalism. And I wonder if the reason why politicians are skeptical to implement a law like this, and this is not just in Australia, like globally, is because then more people than we would like to believe would choose to opt out. And capitalism really needs us to stay alive. Like capitalism really needs its slaves. Have you like sort of encountered any arguments that seem like suspicious in that way?
It's an interesting concept you posed there. I guess not. I think because in terms of the laws that we are pushing for here in Australia, so Australia is quite a conservative country.
Okay.
And the laws that we are pushing for here are very, very conservative, to say the least, in that you would have to be to get approved for voluntary assisted dying, right? You would have to be at least, you'd have to be given 12 months to live already. So in that you would have to have a terminal illness or 6 months left to live if you've got like a neurological disorder. In terms of just wanting, and I use the words opt out as well, but in terms of just someone who, you know, by definition is not sick, that would never pass here. Not anytime in the near future anyway. There's definitely countries that have that you can, you know, if you are mentally unwell or...
like I think Belgium and the Netherlands have that,
Yeah, you can do that, but our laws here would never allow that. I don't think anyway. So, so we only got abortion decriminalised last year. So, like, we're not...
Oh my God.
We are conservative here in Australia, unfortunately.
I honestly had no idea. I actually thought Australia was so progressive. I'm actually shocked.
Absolutely not. We are... I mean, I often use to talk about voluntary assisted dying with people, I often kind of put it in the same context as the marriage debate. I don't know if you know much about this. This is sort of going off topic here, but we actually had a postal vote. So the whole country got to decide whether or not they would allow marriage equality here in Australia.
Wow.
2017. So that was really recently, but I often use that debate in that talking about voluntary assisted dying, saying, you know, if we get this across the line, you actually don't have to use it if you don't want to. Same as marriage equality. Like if you don't want to, you know, marry someone of the same sex as you, or, you know, whatever that may look like, you don't have to. We're not going to make you do it. So that's just a few examples of how sort of backwards Australia is, unfortunately. So in terms of the capitalism stuff, I don't even think it's that. I just think we don't want to go near anything that may upset everyone. That's just what we are. That's just who we are. We just like to kind of keep a lid on everything over here, unfortunately. Yes, I'm pretty sure Australia is, in terms of the laws around this, we are the country with the most kind of stringent, like, to get it across the line. We are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are so the laws that you're currently pushing for are that you would need to have a terminal illness or like some sort of illness. What are the parameters for like what an illness is, and like who defines that? So would that include like a mental illness? So like someone who is chronically suicidal, are they ill or no?
I mean, personally, yes, I think so. Very. But no, in terms of these laws, no, you have to be terminally ill. So, you know, majority of things here, you're looking at cancers. Yeah. So, you have to have been given less than 12 months to live anyway. Yeah. Or if you have something like motor neurons, which is a neurological disorder, that affects your brain, you know, you're looking at the last 6 months of your life you've got left to live. So I mean, I guess what we're trying to do in the small kind of parameters that we've got is just at a time that's already filled with so much suffering, is just to help that last little bit, really, is to say, you know, when people have had enough, they should, especially when they, you know, the rules are they have to be being, you know, they're going to die anyway. Just being able to, and I, like you said, use the words, opt out at a time where it's not horrific, you know?
Right.
So, yeah.
I do find it interesting that the only way it would be legally allowed to die with dignity is when you're already dying, which makes me wonder, like, is that still like a choice? I guess it is technically, but with the way that like society is going, and being in a global pandemic and all this stuff, do you see a wave, or do you see I guess I'm wondering, like, why do you think 85% of people are so open to this law?
I think because once you have seen somebody die who is sick, so who is already kind of, I mean, cancer's awful. Cancer is an awful way to die. And if you've seen somebody die from cancer, the horrific things that happen to your body towards the end, nobody wants to see that happen to anybody they love. And then once you've seen it, you think, holy Christ, I don't want that to happen to me as well. I want to be able to say, I'm done, before it gets so bad that you know, all the horrendous things start to happen. I believe that's the reason why 85% of people are behind it. I think, especially, and this might just be an Australian thing, I think in Australia, because a lot of people who are against this like to use the argument of, if we do allow voluntary assisted dying to come into place, then we're just creating a slippery slope, in that we will just be able to, people who are suicidal will be able to take this, and they don't think that should happen. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that, but they like to use the slippery slope. And again, you know, again with the marriage debate, I use all the time, you know, when we were going to introduce marriage equality, people were like, it's a slippery slope, we're going to have people marrying cars soon, you know, like, but
then it's like if someone
know?
wants to marry a car, why are you pressed? Why does that, you know?
Exactly right. It's like, if it's not hurting you, why, like, what, you know, why does this affect you? But people are just so stuck in their way. So people who are against this quite often use the slippery slope debate, that, you know, we will eventually be able to opt out if you have, you know, people who are chronically suicidal. Now, I can't say for sure, but I cannot see Australia allowing those laws anytime soon. It's 2021. So
that's
we're still here.
That's actually so sad. I just had a thought then.
Sure.
Given that that's such a popular sort of like rebuttal to the idea of euthanasia, do you think that people don't want to be free? Like the idea of knowing that you have the freedom and the choice to opt out when you want. Like, do you think that's just too much of a burden? Like, that level of freedom is just too much of a burden on the average person to be able to even allow that to be an option for them? Because I can't imagine why you would care about a law that may not ever have anything to do with you.
Yeah. I think so. I think, look, as a general rule, I think society is just terrified of the unknown and change. And this is the way we've always done things, so let's not change it. You know, I think the people who are opposed to this, definitely have that in mind. But I also think the people who are for it, if we were to come out and say, you know, the 85% of people that are for it, if we were to come out and say, actually the laws we're pushing for now is that you don't have to be classified as terminally ill, we're just going to let any person, if they've had enough, they can opt out, I think that number would significantly shrink here in Australia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
But I always say, like, you know, there's lots of even myself, when I sort of, this became such a passion for me, and I started researching it and doing all the things, it was quite confronting for me. It sort of took my breath away a little bit when I was reading on all the different rules in all the different countries about people who are suicidal and they can opt out. It sort of took my breath away until I kind of like, sat down and dealt with myself and thought about it. And I thought, well, what is the difference between someone who has cancer, who tries some sort of treatment and then, is good for a little bit, relapses, tries another sort of treatment, good for a little bit, relapses, and then eventually the person who has cancer goes, you know what, I've had enough. Like, this is exhausting. I am so sick. I just don't want to be here anymore. What is the difference between that and somebody who's so chronically mentally unwell to try treatments, be good for a little bit, relapse, try another treatment, be good for a little bit, relapse? It's exactly the same.
It literally is. No, it literally is. I often say that I think one of the reasons euthanasia is so controversial is because like we need to reframe the way that we view suicide and dying as a whole, but especially suicide. I think that a lot of people think that suicide is an action that is done to oneself, whereas in reality, suicide is dying of depression. So in the same way that someone would die of cancer, someone who kills themselves is someone who dies of depression. And I think if we reframed and we changed the language around suicide to reflect what it really is, then I think more people would be open to viewing, or more people would be open to allowing people who are suicidal to die with dignity, as opposed to die in this state of desperation and severe pain, because that is what suicide ultimately ends up being.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Again, Australia. We've only just gotten rid of up until recently, suicide was a crime here in Australia. So
what?
So
how do they legislate that, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't actually know. I don't think it was similar to the abortion stuff, whereas it was a criminal act, but in terms of the people who actually got reprimanded for it, it was a slim amount, if any. But, the language around suicide up until very recently was, that person committed suicide, as in committed a crime. So we've only recently changed the language around that. But I absolutely agree with you that I just think death as a whole in this society is just so taboo. It's just, people just don't know how to deal with it. It's just all swept under a rug. And we're not quite there yet, I think, in terms of being able to talk about it. And I just think people think if they talk about it, it's going to happen to them,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
They just think if we talk about if you talk about it, something terrible is going to happen to them, but it's not. Yeah, that's not, unfortunately, that's not how that works. So.
Yeah, no, not at all.
No.
And okay, I don't know if I'm crossing a boundary by asking this question, but feel free to not answer it at all. But sure. I also wonder, because when I think about euthanasia, I think about it from the first person, or from the perspective of someone who is opting for euthanasia, but we rarely ever talk about what that experience would be like for the loved ones of the person who's opting for euthanasia. And I think it's really interesting that one of the reasons you're driven to advocate for this is because you watched a loved one suffer so much. And I think that speaks a lot to your empathy and your compassion. But I also wonder, was there any sort of dissonance between wanting the best for someone and knowing that the best for someone would be for them to die, but really peacefully, obviously? How did you emotionally, I imagine you just must be your emotional intelligence is on 100 and you're clearly extremely compassionate and empathetic, but I wonder, even for anyone who might be listening to this, sort of like how to grapple with and how to deal with that dissonance of knowing that, like, I love you so much that the best option for you is death right now, and I want to fight for that for you. Did that ever cause any internal dissonance for you?
I guess it's when Jade died, it wasn't an option. So for me, we didn't really have we had no choice but to let Jade die the way she did. Right. But the reason why I'm so passionate about it now, and here I am 2.5 years later, nearly 3 years, still sort of fighting to get it across the line, is because Jade asked me multiple times to help her die. And that she had enough, and she didn't want to be here anymore. And when you love someone so much, and to hear them begging for you to help them die, and knowing that if I did anything like that to fulfill her wishes, I would very much be in jail right now. It's so hard. It was so hard. It was the worst week of my life, and I will say that last week has, like, I'm traumatized from that last week. And wow,
I can't even begin to imagine what the weight of that request must even feel like,
Yes. Yeah. So I just think, and I'm only coming from a place now of watching somebody who has a terminal illness die. I can't really speak on, and I don't really want to speak on behalf of other people who are suffering from mental illnesses and stuff. Like, I'm only kind of working within the guidelines that we are trying to get across the line at the moment. And it just, I'm very lucky in a sense that the guidelines we are trying to get across at the moment is ones that, I'm using lucky quite sparingly, but would have helped Jade. Okay, so that's great. It didn't help Jade because it wasn't here when we're here, but knowing, I guess, having my experience with Jade, knowing that I could potentially save someone else the suffering that Jade went through, but see, the thing is that another one of the arguments around this, and I guess this sort of does tie in with the the mentally unill stuff that we were just talking about, is that a lot of the arguments is people coming back and saying, well, we just need to pour more money into palliative care. Palliative care is, people shouldn't have pain at the end of life. There should be enough drugs to take care of that. And it's like, you know what? Physical suffering is no more or less important than somebody's emotional and mental suffering. Yes. Okay?
Oh my God. Wait, sorry for my ignorance, but what is palliative care?
I was going to explain it. I wasn't sure if you probably have it over there in some other kind of word. So palliative care is basically like, once you reach a certain kind of level in your illness. So once a doctor sort of looks at you and goes, yeah, there's no coming back from here, you're definitely on your way out, you transition into what's called palliative care, which basically means it's a different sort of team of medical professionals that help you until you're dead, pretty much is what it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of like rules and regulations around, the kinds of medications and stuff, it's all very, oh God, I'm just going to get in trouble here if this gets into the wrong hands. It's all very like laxed towards the end, because they're like, look, you're going to die anyway. So this, and this is sort of the thing where we're pushing for, is that, people are really naive in thinking that, I'm already like holding myself back because I'm scared of like the kind of backlash, but I mean, this isn't the first time. It's crazy.
This is anyone who's listening to this episode is probably very open-minded
on board.
And on board. Yeah.
And I know
it's already
been written. It's already been written in some of the literature anyway, so I'm not saying anything that's profound. But so in Australia we call it terminal sedation, right? Which is once you're in a kind of a palliative care state and you're going, you're dying pretty soon, is that doctors perform this kind of thing that's called terminal sedation, which is basically they just jack you more and more and more up with morphine till eventually your body just shuts down. And they do that to hasten death. So doctors are doing this, right? This is happening right here and right now where doctors are bringing on death already. The problem is there's no guidelines around it. So if you get a doctor that's pro hastening your death, like beauty, that's great. Like, let's bring it on because this patient's suffering. But you could get some doctor who thinks, no, like they need to just keep, fighting their way till the end. There's no guidelines around this. There's no
so it's
rules.
it's completely just up to the individual doctor to decide.
Once they reach a palliative state, because when you're in hospital at the moment, if you go to hospital at the moment and you want pain relief, you've got to you ring a little buzzer and they're like, oh, I can't give you any more for another 3 hours. Like, you've had your last kind of lot, you need to wait. Once you're in a palliative care, that goes out the window, because you are going to die anyway. So if you're in pain, they just give you more and more painkillers to relieve your physical symptoms. So, it's very, very well known that terminal sedation is what it's called, is happening now, where patients are just getting more and more morphine till eventually your body can't take it anymore. My problem with Jade is that, so say you were, you're an 80-year-old person who's got some kind of cancer. The terminal sedation would work for you quite quickly because you're old, your heart's slow, your brain's slow, your body's shutting down anyway. So to get that kind of those levels of morphine, you're out. Like, it's going to kill you within, if not hours, a couple of days. With Jade, because Jade's so young, even though she has cancer, her brain and her heart are still fully healthy, and it's in your system to fight, to keep you alive. So her body's riddled with cancer. It's trying to shut down, but her brain and her heart are going, no way, we're only 32. We're here for the long haul, and are fighting to keep her alive. So Jade opted out herself. Like, I knew she woke up on a Friday morning, and that's when she said, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm done. And she died on a Wednesday. So it was 6 days of just there's no other word to just, it was just hell. So
that is literally hell.
Yes, I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy, what happened in that last week. So I just think there's so many variables and there's no guidelines. So my mind is literally spinning right now. I didn't know any of this. I think what also, one of the reasons why I'm spinning is because I don't understand how they can justify. How do you people alive?
Yeah, how do you justify slowly and morphine is basically just like heroin light, essentially.
It's totally like heroin.
Yeah, it's just like heroin, but light. Yeah. So how do you justify just pumping morphine into someone's body and killing them slowly, but then completely believing that euthanasia is completely unethical? Have you heard people try to justify it? Because to me that sounds like pure cognitive dissonance. But I would love to understand why a doctor or someone might see that differently.
I think the argument is that doctors have gone to uni and have a degree and so know what they're doing and what's best for the patient.
Interesting.
And that's really always the default kind of response, is that, what would I know? I'm a 31-year-old woman who has no degree in medical kind of science or anything like that. But people, I'm sure you know this, people just love to put their blind faith in medical professionals, which is just dumb. Yeah. So,
and that's a whole other kind of
that's a whole other podcast.
Literally.
So I just think, it's this kind of doctor knows best, and it's kind of like what's not being seen and heard didn't happen, and it's just, they think you can justify it as, oh, we're just minimizing their pain, whoever it is, but you're like, but you are killing that person because they are getting more and more dosed up. And there's lots of beautiful doctors who I've listened to with various podcasts and read various articles through my research in this who have quite openly said, and they could very much lose their licenses for saying things like this, but have said, oh, absolutely, I have hastened a patient's death because what is the point? What is the point? They are in so much pain. They are suffering so much. Absolutely. I have done what I can do in a legal framework at the moment to lessen people's death, but to hasten someone's death, sorry. But one of the arguments around that is with voluntary assisted dying, it's in the name in terms of voluntary, but it's very much based on consent. And the patient consenting to wanting to bring on their death sooner.
Yes.
In the state that someone is in hospital and they are, being terminally sedated, there's been no consent around that at all.
Exactly.
That's someone who might not want to die quickly, it's happening anyway. And it usually 9 times out of 10, it's the it's the patient's family and loved ones who are watching them suffer saying, yeah, please just keep giving them morphine, because it's this unspoken thing where we all know this is happening. We all know that if you keep pumping this person with morphine, they're going to die. But we can't say that. We can't talk about it. So we just keep saying, oh, they're in pain, like they need more morphine. It's so shady. It's all, even though it's the right thing to do, it is so shady.
I don't know. See, and this is why I really fully believe that like everyone has to study philosophy, because this is making me wonder, like, should you be able to be a doctor if you haven't like deeply and thoroughly studied ethics and morality, because it's just like,
I don't know. Again, I'm not sure of the rules around this in anywhere else that euthanasia, or voluntary assisted dying is legal. But in Australia, where it is legal, which is in Victoria in Western Australia, if you personally, as a doctor, do not believe in voluntary assisted dying, you do not have to be a part of it.
Okay, yeah.
So you can opt out.
Yeah.
You can opt out of helping people opt out.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a part of it. But, that's also crap for people who want this, who may have had the same doctor their whole lives, who have seen them suffer, who have given them the cancer diagnosis, who have been there for the treatments, who have seen the suffering they go to. This patient goes to their GP, who they've had forever, and they say, listen, I've had enough. Like, I have tried everything. I want to take voluntary assisted dying. And that GP legally can turn around now and say, no.
Yeah.
And that patient's forced to go and find another one. It's just so much added suffering, for lack of a better word, and stress on people who are already just going through absolute torture.
Yeah. Oh my God. And I have a bit of a technical question now that we were talking about consent. No. Yeah. Because you were talking about consent, and like that is fundamentally like what makes voluntary assisted dying so beautiful, is that it's rooted in consent. What happens in a scenario where someone is clearly going to die, but for some reason or other, they're just not able to consent to their own death. So maybe they're in a coma, or I don't know. Yeah, like they just may not literally have the physical means to speak for themselves. Does voluntary assisted dying allow close relatives to speak on their behalf? Like, would someone be able to be like, you know what? I know this person well enough. I know that she would want to die right now. Let's just like put her out of her misery. Or how does that work? Thank you for listening to the first half of this conversation. If you're interested in listening to the rest of this conversation, you will find it on Patreon. So please support my Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/bobosvoid, or you can just click on the link in the description box below. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'll be having so many more of these types of conversation with different friends, with different strangers, with all types of interesting people, and sometimes just conversing with myself. If you are interested in philosophy, politics, race, all the things, I'll be hosting all the conversations on my Patreon. So patreon.com/bobosvoid, or just click on the description box below and support me. Thank you.